I have a whole section in my introduction where I talk about sort of moving from this idea of mom guilt and green guilt and realizing that the things I was doing to be more environmentally sustainable also were teaching my kids the values and skills that I wanted to teach them. And they were actually making me a better mom, not taking time away from or somehow making me a worse mom.
They say when a baby is born, so is a mother. But while you are there to help your baby grow into the person he or she is meant to be, who is there to help you? Many women feel lost and alone when they become mothers, wondering, who am I now? Sometimes it feels like the transformation from woman to mother is as radical as a caterpillar's transformation into a butterfly. Did you know that inside the chrysalis, the caterpillar literally turns into goop before it rearranges itself into a butterfly? This podcast is about the goop, what soul transformation looks like as you transition from being a woman to a mom. Your baby's growth matters, but yours does too. You're not alone. I'm your host, Brittany Ming. Welcome to the Motherhood Metamorphosis.
Welcome everyone to this episode of the Motherhood Metamorphosis. I'm your host, Brittany Ming, and today we're talking to Shannon Brescher Shea. Shannon is a writer, environmental activist, and a mom of two awesome kids who are obsessed with rabbits and elephants. She lives in the Maryland suburbs of Washington, D.C. So welcome, Shannon. I'm super happy to have you on here today.
Thank you. I'm happy to be on.
Yeah, so you are a passionate environmental activist, as you said in your bio. You have written a book about this, and I'd love to hear about why this topic is close to your heart. So I was wondering if you could share your story about leading up to why you wrote the book and how this has impacted you as a woman and a mom.
Absolutely. So I fell in love with becoming an environmentalist when I was in third grade, going into fourth grade. I had visited Florida with my parents and visited specifically Homosassa Springs State Park, which is a manatee refuge. And I saw these huge, beautiful creatures who just seem very innocent and adorable, and at the same time, gigantic. And there's a place that you can go in the state park where you walk down a set of stairs and you're in a plexiglass cube. And so rather than an aquarium where the animals are looking out at you, they're looking in at you. You're in the aquarium, essentially, and you're in their environment, and you get to see them very face to face. And manatees are very curious creatures. So they come over and they look at these people who are looking at them. And then the same day, I also learned that they were endangered. And I learned that there was a strong possibility of them going extinct. And that just broke my passionate 10-year-old heart. And I wanted to do something about it. And so I decided when I got back to school that we were going to adopt a manatee. And I, in fact, convinced my class to kind of sign off on adopting this manatee, which is a specific program actually through that Homosassa Springs is a partner with, and we adopted a specific manatee, unlike some of these other adoption ones. They actually send you the information about the manatee and their name and like how big they are and if they have any babies and all this sort of stuff. And so that was really fulfilling to me to see that, I saw something was wrong and then I could do something about it and really make a difference for these animals. And so since then, I've been very passionate about the environment. As I grew older, I began to see the intersections between environmental issues and environmental justice and social justice. How things like polluted water and polluted air and climate change have the biggest effects and the most severe effects on people who are affected by other social injustices like racism, like poverty. And you see this also the gender aspect of this. Women and children tend to be more vulnerable to those things as well. And so that really drove my interest in climate justice and climate change. And when I became a mom, I knew that this was not something I could just leave to the side. It wasn't a hobby. It's a lifelong passion. It's something that's driven, a lot of my career and a lot of my not day job time. I hesitate to call it free time. And so I knew I needed to figure out a way to integrate it into, being a mom. And that was something I really, really struggled with
Mm.
because I felt both this, what I call green guilt, which is this feeling that you're never doing enough in terms of being environmentally sustainable. You know, you're producing too much waste, or you're driving too much, or you're not going into enough protests or whatever. And then the mom guilt, which I'm sure many listeners of this podcast are very familiar with, which is the feeling that you're not a good enough mom, or you're not spending enough time with your kids, or you're not good enough. And both these things seemed to clash for me because it felt like whenever I was doing something environmentally sustainable, that was less time I was spending with my children. And that was especially true that when they were younger, when they were, infants and toddlers, that it felt like if I was taking things away from them, taking
Mm.
time or energy away, like a zero sum game. And one day I was reading a different parenting book called There's No Such Thing as Bad Weather, which is about getting kids outside, downstairs in my basement on our beanbag chairs. And I just had this like light bulb go off. And I realized that there was no conflict, even though it felt like there was a conflict, and it felt like there was a conflict to me, certainly, between sort of the environmental sustainability and being a good parent and being a good mom specifically. That the things that I was doing to be environmentally sustainable were teaching my kids the values that I wanted to teach them: caring about other people, being connected to the community, responsibility, resilience. And they were also, and this came a little bit later, also turned out they're teaching the skills that kids need to be able to be those things as well. And that was what led to my book. Was I realized like other people probably also feel this pull between these two things, um, and would like to realize the same realization I made, because it's not obvious at first.
Yeah, I love that. I love that story about transition. Can you give us a practical example of something that you felt like was taken away from your time with your kids? And then maybe something that you felt like, oh, I can do this with my kids, and that transition that you went through.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm big into gardening and gardening for food specifically. And it felt like, going out to water the garden from our rain barrel, or, pull weeds, or get the garden ready for the winter, was taking time away from my kids. And sometimes it was, and often it was when I needed a break. And so I should just give myself that break and not worried about it. But then also often I was able to figure out how to integrate my kids into those things, to have them plant seeds with me, even when they were very small, and adjust how I did those things to be more inclusive of them. For example, the way I garden is called lasagna or layer gardening. You take layers of organic matter, you take leaves or straw or compost, newspaper, and pile it up in the garden in the fall, and then plant into it in the coming spring. And so one way that my kids help with that I didn't have to worry about them messing things up and they still enjoyed, was helping me rake the leaves to gather up. And they also like to jump in them and stuff like that. And then putting them in the garden. And every year, that's actually kind of a beloved tradition we have, is, as much as some people might be like, oh, raking leaves, they actually really enjoy it because it's an excuse to jump in them. And we make it a fun thing instead of just this chore. And then they also are learning about, they're learning about ecology, because the leaves break down and they produce soil, which is what our plants grow in. And it's the same process that leaves break down in the forest that makes the forest floor so plentiful, so abundant. They're learning about responsibility, about planning ahead. We're doing this in the fall to prepare all the way for next spring, because if we don't do it now, our plants won't grow as well next spring. They're learning cooperation and working together, and making something that could be unpleasant into something maybe not fun, but certainly, doable. So just that mindset shift of, how do I incorporate my kids in a way that works for them and for me, I feel like has been really key to so many different things. And, we've seen this, I've done it with activism as well. I've brought my kids to climate marches and to protests, and we leave when they're done, and that's fine. You don't have the same kinds of expectations, but it doesn't mean you can't still do them, those activities.
Yeah, I think that that expectation management is so key. Because I remember when we were doing a little garden this year and we tried to start from seedlings, and man, that was so hard. But when we did plant the seeds, I had the kids in there and they kind of just stayed as long as they wanted to. And it was real exciting in the beginning. And then, like, one by one, my three little ones, they were like, okay, I'm done with this. And one of my boys stayed the entire time. But the other two little ones were just like, okay, I want to plant like, 4 rows and then I want to leave. And so
Yeah.
I counted that as a success because I was involving them and I didn't make them stay the whole time, but they had fun, like mixing some of the dirt together and then putting it in the egg cartons and,
Hmm.
watering it and all those things and poking their finger in the soil and then they stayed and then they left. So, and yes, we did have a big mess. There was a lot of dirt on the floor and stuff, but I knew that was going to be part of the process. So, I think it's that expectation management is key because it's the mental shift that helps us realize this is not just about my passion, or it's not just about my kids doing a fun activity. It's about us finding ways to do life together, and I think that encompasses so much of motherhood, not just in this aspect but in so many different aspects of those first 5 years of motherhood, just learning about expectation management.
Yeah, exactly. And that is really a huge theme of my book is this idea of how do we live life together as a family and do it in ways that are good for us, are good for our community, and are good for the world. And a big theme is about how sustainability isn't just environmental sustainability and social sustainability as a result, because they're so deeply connected, is not just this nice add-on that you do when you have time, because God knows none of us actually have time. Um, it's something that you can fold into the fabric of your life and that makes your life better. It's going to be different for everyone. What everybody is going to be able to do is going to be different. I really love walking and biking places. We've started biking our kids to school because partly because we just really like it, and partly because it helps my older son focus in school and have more emotional regulation. And we can do that in part because we have a city that has um, prioritized making streets safe for everyone, and it's far from perfect. What works for us there may not work for somebody else, but they might be able to do something. They might be able to reduce way more waste than I can and find personal fulfillment in doing so. And so families have to find these places that you can kind of have those intersections of what's good for your family, what do you enjoy doing, what's good for a community, what connects you to your community, and what's sort of environmentally sustainable for the larger world, the planet, all of our both human and non-human neighbors. And so finding those are really the sweet spot. And I hope that my book can help people find those things for themselves, that aren't just these like add-ons or just another chore to do.
Yeah. So can you talk to me about how writing this book or changing your thinking, because I'm sure those two things went together as
Hmm.
you went through that process. Can you talk about how that reduced both your green guilt and your mom guilt?
Yeah, absolutely. So when I had that sort of light bulb notion, that was partly because I did a series of interviews on my blog with people who were like green moms. Most of them were like way more environmentally sustainable in a specific area than I was. They don't have a car, or they have one garbage can full of trash a year, or they're vegan or whatever. And one of the questions I asked, because I really wanted to know, was when does this conflict? When does being green conflict with being a good parent? And they all said it doesn't. And I was just baffled by that. I was so confused because I'm like, nobody else struggles with this except me. And so I had that light bulb moment, and because I thought maybe they're just delusional, or in denial. And I had that light bulb moment, but it was just intuitive. It was just sort of like I wasn't it was an idea, and I had done enough reading around this area to have a sense that I was probably right about this. But those doubts always nag at you, and I managed to pitch a book despite that. But as I did the research for the book, it just became clearer and clearer. There was either, for everything, my book is very backed by social science. I am a social scientist by training. I did my master's thesis in communication research. And so I read a lot of research papers for this book, and hopefully made them as easy to understand and relatable as possible, because I know they're not always. And then I also interviewed a whole bunch of people, both sort of parents with practical experience and people who run organizations, for example. And it just kept showing me that initial light bulb moment, I didn't need to doubt it. I was right. My intuition was right. And it was my anxiety that was kind of ringing those guilt bells. And so it just sort of doing the research reinforced that. And one area in which I thought it was really particularly striking was, society tells us we need to buy more stuff, buy more stuff, buy more stuff. And I have a whole chapter on consumerism and materialism. It's probably the area that research is the most obvious. Basically, if people who are materialists, who care more, I define it as caring more about stuff than people, and valuing stuff more than people, are unhappy, they are less kind and less generous to people, they're kind of jerks. They have bad relationships. And so that reading that chapter in particular, or writing that chapter in particular, researching it, just really reinforced what, despite everything our society tells us, that you need to buy your kids more stuff, that they need all these fancy things, or they even need to like go on vacation to these fancy places, or get into, quote unquote, the best colleges, because otherwise God knows what's going to happen. That none of that's true. Figuring out what works for your family and what kind of, things that are really valuable to you, not physical things, but the relationships that are valuable to you, are the most important. And
Yeah,
so
I really love that. And I really like how you focused on saying, hey, what's important to you? Like, what's important to your relationship, and figuring out what that means for your family. Because that transition to saying, okay, I'm this woman, now I have these relationships with my kids. What is my motherhood going to look like as myself? And, you may not be the family who has no car, or the family who does only cloth diapering, or, elimination communication, or whatever it may be that's
Right.
super eco-friendly. Like, but you may be, somebody who takes their kid to the recycling center and,
Mhm.
throws the glass bottles in and enjoys that connection together. Or maybe you have the window box garden, or
Mhm.
you ride your bikes to school like you guys do. Like, figuring out and saying, this is what's going to work for my family, and building our relationships together. I think is that what you feel like your book is helping people realize?
Oh yeah, definitely. And how do we connect that to our larger community? A big theme is engagement. Our communities have become increasingly disconnected, and we obviously saw that during COVID. But and I talk about, how do you use biking and walking places? How do you use volunteering in your community, outside, things like stream cleanups and beach cleanups? How do you use gardening? How do you use uh, spending more time with people and less time with your stuff, all to connect to your family and to your community?
Yeah, that's so good. I love that. And I love all the practical ideas that you have shared with us today. So what would you say, like, to a mom who's a new mom and she's struggling maybe with green guilt and mom guilt? What do you think you would tell her as she's starting out? Like, how would you encourage her in that aspect, besides buying your book, which we really do need to do that?
You can also get it from the library if for some reason you can't buy it. And I love when people get things from the library. There was a concept that I talk about in the first chapter, where I define kindness and like what you need to be kind, because it's not just being nice, it's also being generous and being responsible and things like that, and skills you need. But it's an idea that I describe at the end of it, which I thought was really helpful. It's from the psychologist D.W. Winnicott. And it's all the way from 1971. And he proposed the idea of the good enough mother. And it's basically what it sounds like, which is you don't have to be perfect. Good enough is good enough. And that doesn't just apply for motherhood, it also applies to being an environmentalist. No one is going to be perfect. Nobody completely sustainable. That's just not the way our society is set up. But if we all work to be good enough, we're going to find ways that we can help each other. We can fill in each other's gaps. We can rely on each other, both for our parenting and for our environmental sustainability. And in fact, that's better because, at least for me, independence is not the goal. Interdependence is the goal. Being able to rely on other people and accept help and give help where it's needed is much more powerful in the way we're going to move towards truly sustainable community than all these people trying to do everything themselves and just burning out, and just being exhausted and miserable. So figure out what your good enough is. Because I know I talked about like one of the reasons I drink guilt. Yeah, we gave up on cloth diapers with our second kid because there was just no way we could keep up with the laundry.
Yeah,
And
I did.
there's,
I
lots
did
of
cloth
joy.
diapers with my twins, so because we were very poor, and I wanted to be environmentally friendly, and I
Right.
had like moved into like sewing my own, and then I
Oh wow.
sold them, and like I was like all in on the cloth diapers.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
and then for my third child, I realized, okay, now I have three children and I'm trying to cloth diaper and I'm like, I cannot do this. Like, and my
Yeah.
husband was like, it's okay if you don't. And I'm like, okay. It's like I needed permission to be like, it's
Mhm.
okay if you're not cloth diaper mom anymore. And we use
Exactly.
disposables. But I had a lot of guilt over that. And I'm like,
It
no, I
is.
need to be like environmentally friendly. And I like sewed these diapers and how am I not, using them myself? But I just, keeping up with three children is a lot different than keeping up with two babies. So now I had two
Right.
school-age children and an infant, and I was working. So it was a lot, and I just had to let something go and realize, okay, like you
Mhm.
said, I am the good enough mother in this situation,
Right.
and that's
Exactly.
the way it needed to be.
Yeah, and my husband's a stay-at-home dad and has been since our first kid was born. And so he's the one responsible for laundry. And so I have to be able to trust him to be able to be like, no, I can't do this, and be like, okay, yeah, that's okay. And sort of, understand for yourself what is acceptable and what is not, and what's that line, and does that line change under different circumstances? And sometimes it might, depending on how many kids you have and where you live, and how those kids change over time. Um,
Yeah,
and sort of
exactly.
being able to forgive yourself for that. I think also this is where there's a big discussion that I don't know that anybody outside the environmental community cares about, but in the environmental community, about, do we focus on individual action or do we focus on changing systems? And this is where people, if you have trouble keeping up with individual action, that's a great jumping off point to think about, well, what about the systems is making this so hard?
Mhm.
Okay, you aren't able to cloth diaper. Well, part of the reason is because, one, disposable diapers, but they make up so stinking easy. And two, because our families are not set up anymore to be connected with other people. If you're not able to walk places because you have no sidewalks, well, somebody made that decision to value prioritizing cars over having a sidewalk there. And then that's where you can think about, how do you connect to those systems and then potentially change those systems through things like activism. And activism doesn't have to mean, it can mean calling your senator. That's great. I love calling Congress. Well, okay, nobody loves calling Congress, but I love the idea of calling Congress. But it can also be writing a letter to your mayor, or having your kids even write to your mayor or your city council. I participate in our local bicycle advisory committee, and I can point, and that's one thing that's super awesome and powerful about local activism. I can point to bike lanes that exist because I help advocate for them, that we can now ride to school safely because of some of the work I did, that I've done over the years with the city, which is really powerful for kids to know. My kids wrote a letter to the mayor and the city council, and a couple of city council members wrote back to them.
Yeah,
It's so
that's
empowering
awesome.
for kids to see that people are listening to them in charge.
Yeah, their voice has power. And
Mm-hmm.
it's not just mom's voice, it's the kid's voice. And then together as a family, you're making that decision to say, hey, we want something different for
Exactly.
ourselves and for our community.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Well, Shannon, this was such a great conversation. And I just hope it gives people so much food for thought, all the examples that you gave, and ideas that you presented both here and in your book. So I just want to thank you for coming on and talking about it today.
Thank you. I really
Yeah.
appreciate it. The book is Growing Sustainable Together, Practical Resources for Raising Kind, Engaged, Resilient Children.
Awesome. And I will definitely share that. And we will share pictures on our Facebook page and on other social media to make sure that people know what it looks like and can either look for it at their local bookstore or at the library, because that would be a great way to access it. So I like to end our time with these fun rapid fire questions. So are you ready for these?
Sure.
All right. Number one, which Disney princess would you like to take out to coffee?
Oh, Belle. I'm a big reader, so.
Would you rather spend a weekend at a cabin in the woods or in a city with great restaurants?
So hard. I would probably say a city, but I love them both. So it's very hard to say because I'm a huge outdoors person, but I also really love food. My husband used to work in a fine dining restaurant. He used to be we joke that we have a personal chef because he used to be a line cook at a fine dining restaurant.
That's awesome. I know that one would be a hard one for me too because I love good food. But you're also like, I just want the peace. I want like the stream in the background as you sit on the deck and like, drink wine together with your spouse. So yeah, that would be that's a hard one for me too. All right, an ordinary moment that brings you great joy.
We really like this sounds weird, but in the summer we really like waiting till it's like dusk and watching the bats come out. We have some bats that live over in the park across the street from us, and they come out and they start catching bugs, and it's really cool to watch.
I love that. I like that. Coffee or tea?
Tea. I hate coffee, and I love tea. I drink so much tea.
Last show you binged and loved?
Oh, don't watch very much TV. It's not exactly a show, but I watch, this is the nerdiest thing, and it's so nerdy. And I thought I would never do it, but I watch people play Dungeons and Dragons live, called Critical Role. And it's 4 hours a week of people playing Dungeons and Dragons, and it is amazing. And they have these ridiculous, amazing characters, and just really, really good storytelling.
That's great. I love that. Go-to book, fiction or nonfiction?
Probably my favorite book is Anne Lamott's Traveling Mercies. And it's about faith and doubt and struggling when God wants you to love people and you don't always want to.
I need to pick that one up. I love her writing, but I have not read that one, so that's a good recommendation.
Yeah, that's my favorite.
When you were 5 years old, what did you want to be when you grew up?
I'm pretty sure I wanted to be a writer. I know, again, in that third grade thing, so a little older, my plan was to be a famous writer, in the winter, and a marine biologist in the summer, because I knew they went out on boats, so they couldn't go out in the winter. So I was going to have a dual career.
But famous only in the winter. That's great. I like that. That's so cute.
I guess I would write only in the winter. I'd be famous all the time.
Yes, famous all the time. Yes, that's great. What are you looking forward to?
For so long, I was looking forward to publishing my book, and now it's been 2 years, and so I'm just kind of in the midst of figuring out what I'm doing next.
Finish this sentence. Motherhood is.
The first thing that came to mind was hard.
That's honest and truthful. Yeah. I 100% agree with that. All right, Shannon, where can we find you online?
Yeah, the name of my blog is We'll Eat You Up, We Love You So. It's from the book Where the Wild Things Are. If you search for me on Facebook, you'll find me there. If it's We'll Eat You Up, We Love You So.com is the name of my blog. And then I'm also on, that's my Instagram handle as well. And then I'm also on Twitter under Storyteller with an I instead of a Y, STORITELLER.
Right, and I'll share all those links in our show notes and your book and a link to where we can find it online. So thanks so much for coming on today.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Motherhood Metamorphosis. If you've enjoyed this episode, please hit the thumbs up and subscribe to this channel so you never miss an episode. Next, tell your friends. Podcasts are a slow growth type of social media, so promo works best when it's from person to person. If you know another mom who's in the goop right now, send her a text of encouragement and the link to the episode that is speaking to your heart right now. If you have a story about your own matrescence, the physical, emotional, hormonal, and social transition that occurs when someone becomes a mother, please leave a comment below. I want this channel to be a place where women can build community about the challenges and joys of their own motherhood metamorphosis. Thank you so much for listening today. I hope it encouraged you and gave you some good food for thought. If you ever have any questions, comments, or you'd like to reach out to me personally, you can email me at brittanyaming@gmail.com.